What is going on, guys? It's finally May, which means planting time for a lot of us gardeners. Now, it is an overcast day, it's a little bit rainy, a little bit windy, but let me tell you, that is the perfect conditions for a process we like to call hardening off. And if you've never heard this term before, or if you have and have no clue what it means, or if you just need a little bit of a refresher, make sure you watch this video to the end because we are going to be going over all of the details of this process and the easiest and simplest way of doing it. So stay tuned and let's get into it. Now, hardening off is the process of taking your plants that you've been growing indoors all winter long and slowly acclimating them to the outdoor conditions. There are a number of ways of going through this process, and everybody has their own little way of accomplishing it. But in today's video, I'm going to be going over the traditional way that most people would recommend you first doing. But then I'm also going to go over the easy or the lazy way of accomplishing the same exact thing in half the time. But before I get into all of that, I want to first go over the benefits of hardening off your plants, as well as some of the things that can happen if you don't. Now again, hardening off is the process of taking your plants from an indoor environment and slowly acclimating them to the outdoor conditions. Because we've been growing these plants indoors all winter, they haven't been exposed to the UV rays of the sun or the wind or any of the natural conditions that you're going to find outdoors. So the plants naturally are going to be very weak. The stems are often going to be very spindly. They're going to be almost like a rubber material. The leaves are going to be very thin, and they really just can't handle the outdoor conditions if you just go and directly place them outside on a nice sunny day. The benefits of acclimating your plants to the outdoor conditions are the fact that the leaves and the stems are naturally going to become thicker. The new growth coming in is going to be much more suitable for the outdoor elements, and they're going to be able to take the UV rays, the wind, all of the natural conditions that are going to be found when you move them outdoors. There are so many problems that can arise if you do not harden off your plants, and one of the biggest signs is sun scald. Sun scald is where the leaves basically start to burn. The leaves will over time turn completely white, meaning that the plant or the leaves are not going to be able to convert any of the light to energy anymore. They often just fall off, and this doesn't necessarily kill the plant, but if you're left with just a stem in the ground, it's going to take so much time, and all of that effort that you put into those plants throughout the winter is now gone, and those plants are going to lose so much time in the garden, and it's going to take months possibly for the plants to recover. The other thing that often happens if you don't harden off your plants is the stems become very weak. The whole plant in general is going to wilt. It's going to look like you need to water your plants, and really it's just the fact of the UV rays and the wind and all of these natural conditions all hitting those plants at once. And it's basically just going to make your plants become completely vulnerable to everything and super weak, so that these plants are just going to often fall over, and a lot of times they're not going to make it. So it's very important that you properly harden off your plants so that you are not running into the issues like burning your plants, the stems and the leaves becoming very weak, and all of these problems that can arise if you don't do it properly. All right, I had to go ahead and move out of the greenhouse because it is getting too hot for me and I about melted. But I went ahead and grabbed a plant that is going through the process of hardening off right now. And you can see that this is a tomato plant, but it is pretty flimsy. There's not a lot going on here, but the plant has to become weak before it gets strong. So because the wind, the temperature fluctuations, the UV rays, everything in the outdoor elements is hitting this plant all at once, it becomes very vulnerable to pretty much everything. So to get it strong and on the right track for the outdoor environment, we really need to make sure that this plant is properly hardened off. Now, I wanted to also grab this plant because you can really see the difference. The bottom of the leaves that were growing while this plant was indoors are more flat. There's not a lot of characteristics going on with it. You can't really see the veins. It's just pretty much a flat leaf. But since this plant has been outdoors, that new growth is starting to come in. You can see that the top of the leaves, there's more veins. The leaves are a lot thicker. and a lot more is happening for these leaves. And these leaves are going to be a lot more developed and suitable for the outdoor conditions. Now, there are two ways that you can really go about hardening off your plants, and the first one is the traditional way. And this is the way that so many people are going to recommend that you harden off your plants. And this is acclimating your plants slowly for a week to 2 week period. Now that's a lot of time, but this way is basically making sure that your plants are fully acclimated to everything outdoors. And this is basically just taking your plants and adding on pretty much just 1 hour every day. So setting your plant out for 1 hour for the first day, second day setting it out for the second or 2 hours, third day setting it out for 3 hours, and so on and so forth until the plant has fully acclimated at about day 7 to 8 days. If you're using this method, you want to make sure that the first 2 to 3 days you're setting your plants into partly cloudy conditions. You don't want to set them out on the first couple days right into full sun. Otherwise, even in that first hour to 2 hours, they could still become burned and run into a lot of the problems that we talked about earlier. Now, this is a great way of going about accomplishing the hardening off process, but it's not necessarily the best way to do it. Now, the second way of accomplishing this process is the easy or the more lazy way of doing it, and that only takes 3 to 5 days to do compared to the traditional way that takes a week or more. Now, this way of doing it is making sure that you first look at the forecast and find a 3-day period to where it's completely overcast, not a lot of sunlight penetrating through the clouds. And what you're going to do is you're just going to set these out for the first day, 4 hours, second day, 8 hours, and then third day, leave them out all day long. You really want to make sure, though, that the days are completely overcast and there is no direct sunlight coming in contact with these plants. You also want to make sure that you're not putting your plants out on a super windy day, because that can have the same dramatic effect that putting your plants out on a sunny day can have. By the end of this 3-day period, you're going to have plants that are just as hardened off as the ones putting it out for a week or more. Now, this way is so much more practical than the traditional way because it only takes 3 days to accomplish, and each day you can leave your plants out for much longer than you would be able to the other way. A lot of you watching also have very busy schedules, so moving your plants in and out each day, only adding on 1 hour a day, and doing this for a whole week or more, just nobody has time for that. Nobody wants to go through that whole process. And if you're growing on a larger scale like I am, for example, let's say hundreds of plants that you need to harden off, moving those plants indoors and outdoors every day for 7 days plus would take multiple hours out of your day, and it's just not something that you should have to do. All right, now that you have the process of hardening off down, there are a few things that you should know along the way. And the first thing is making sure that the soil is relatively dry. You don't want super soggy, moist soil, because what's going to happen is your plants are going through a stage where they are super vulnerable. They become very weak, like we talked about. And if you are overwatering your plants or giving them too much water, they're often becoming more and more susceptible to things like damping off, fungal or disease issues, and all of these things that can set in much easier when the plants really don't have the strength to take care of them. All right, the next tip that I have that kind of contradicts the first one I talked about is seeing if out of the 3-day forecast, if you're going the lazy route, one of those 3 days, if there is a nice rainfall that could happen. Now, rain is a natural source of both available oxygen and nitrogen that are already dissolved and readily available right to the plant right away. Now, this is nice energy boost for the plants so that because they're going through this phase, super weak, super vulnerable, that oxygen, that nitrogen is going to perk the plants back up. It's going to turn the leaves a vibrant green, and they are going to get right back on track when the hardening off process is over, quicker and more efficiently. All right, the next tip I have is super helpful in my opinion, and that's putting your plants by some sort of building. So putting them on the side of a house, a shed, even a greenhouse. And that's just basically to help block out a lot of the wind, the UV rays, just to where the wind is giving the plants a nice breeze, nice airflow to thicken up the stems, but it's not necessarily damaging the plants and just blowing through and ravaging them to where they become stressed, to where things start to break, and problems that you can run into. Putting your plants by a building also helps to cast a shadow either earlier in the morning or later in the afternoon, meaning that your plants aren't going to be in the open sunlight for the entire length of the day, meaning that there is even lesser chances of your plants burning. The last tip that I have for you guys is something that we covered a little bit earlier in this video, something that is pretty obvious, but is also the most important tip of all. And that's making sure that you are checking the forecast daily. And I can't stress this enough. You want to make sure that your plants are getting the right type of days to be able to properly harden off. So what I mean by that is if the nights are getting cold, making sure you're bringing your plants in. If the days that were supposed to be cloudy end up being very sunny days, making sure that you're bringing your plants inside so that they're not sitting in that high intensity sunlight, and just so many other things like this that could happen. And that is all I have for you guys today on the principles of hardening off your seedlings. If you enjoyed today's video or learned something new, please make sure you leave a like, subscribe. If you have any questions at all, make sure you leave them in the comment section below. I'm also curious to see how all of you guys harden off your plants. Is there a certain way that you go about it? How long do you leave your plants out? What are some of the things that you go through to make sure that your plants are ready for the outdoors? Leave those in the comment section below. I'm super curious to hear what you do with your plants. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.